APIA Nevada is a grassroots nonprofit organization that advocates for policies empowering everyday Asian Pacific Islander Nevadans. Nevada is home to a growing APIA community, accounting for 1 in 10 voters. We are One APIA Nevada. Concili Incorporated is Nevada's premier Democratic campaign firm, fighting for progressive issues and candidates for over a decade, and proud sponsor of Battleborn Progress.
This episode of Out in Front brought to you by
Concili Inc., Nevada State Education Association, One APIA Nevada, Silver State Voices, and Stefan and Marta Schmidt, as well as our episode sponsors, Save Lives Nevada and Washoe Education Association.
Thanks for joining us tonight for this very important edition of Out in Front with Annette. Obviously, it's not a jovial celebration that we're having this week like we got to have last week with Public Lands Day. This week, we're talking about gun violence prevention. We're talking about 1 October and the horrific day 5 years ago that changed so many lives all across the United States and here in the Valley. We have community leaders on tonight. We have folks who are survivors on tonight to talk about gun violence prevention policies here in Nevada, the upcoming election and what that means to Nevada for these policies, and so much more. But we actually wanted to start the evening with a message from Congresswoman Titus. As y'all know, Congresswoman Titus represents the district that 1 October happened in 5 years ago. And she wanted to share some words with us before we begin. And so I want to play this message from her. The volume might be a little low on it, but I wanted to make sure that we got it because she really wanted to be here tonight, but she's in DC taking votes. So we'll go ahead and roll that video and then we'll start our live show in just a few minutes.
This Saturday marks 5 years since the 1 October massacre, in which 58 people were killed and hundreds more injured right in my district. It remains the deadliest mass shooting in modern American history. My sincere condolences go to the families of those killed and injured and to the professionals who cared for them right on the front lines. Today is a difficult day for all of Las Vegas, but in the face of unimaginable horror, our city has shown resilience. Following the tragedy, I vowed to help find solutions to prevent future acts of gun violence in our communities. My Closing the Bump Stock Loophole Act, which has been introduced every Congress since 2017, builds on existing law by requiring bump stocks, the device used in the 1 October shooting, to be registered under the National Firearms Act. This makes it illegal to manufacture, sell, or possess them. I was proud to spearhead the inclusion of this measure in the House-passed Protecting Our Kids Act, and to support other measures, including a ban on high-capacity magazines and closing the boyfriend loophole. I also supported the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, signed by President Biden in June, but only with the understanding that it was a first step in keeping deadly weapons out of the hands of dangerous people. It's far past time we make our country safer for all of us and for future generations by answering the nation's call for action on gun violence prevention. People don't think of Las Vegas as a place with a sense of community, but they couldn't be more wrong. Following the shooting, people came together in shared grief and grit like never imagined. They were inspired by the acts of heroism that night by those in attendance and those first on the scene. In the early morning, when the unbelievable news broke, people were in shock, but they rushed to donate blood. Hotels offered complimentary rooms for those who had to stay in town with injured family members and those who came to town to sadly collect remains and make final arrangements. Restaurants provided meals for frontline workers. Churches, social organizations, labor unions, and local businesses all pitched in however they could be helpful. Ordinary people reached deep in their pockets to contribute to the Victims Fund, and service centers were quickly established to provide counseling and other logistical assistance. During the President's annual State of the Union address to Congress, I always leave my guest seat vacant, marked with a black ribbon in memory of the October 1 victims. But that's not enough. Our community, along with the others that have been scarred by gun violence, will continue fighting until we have made real progress in addressing this deadly plague.
All right, we want to thank Congresswoman Titus for her message tonight, and we want to thank her for all of the work she's doing, along with the Democrats in our Nevada delegation in Washington, D.C., who work every day on gun violence prevention. I was so honored this summer to be able to go back to Washington, D.C. and be there for the signing of the bill that expanded gun violence prevention measures nationally. And I'm so proud of the work we have done historically in Nevada on this issue. And I just want to say thank you to Congresswoman Titus for continuing to be a leader on this issue. Now I want to go to one of my favorite leaders in the state. We have a lot of amazing people on this evening to talk about this critical issue. We will also be joined by Stephen Lindley later with Brady United Against Gun Violence. He wasn't able to be live on the show, but he's a former police officer, and he has been in law enforcement for a long time. So Amber from our team was able to catch up with him this morning and talk about gun violence prevention from law enforcement's perspective. And so we wanted to make sure to include that in the show. He'll be on later in the show. Just a reminder, if you have questions tonight, please put them in the chat. We want to make sure to get to all of the questions, whether you're on YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Facebook. Share this with your friends and family, because this is an important episode to make sure we're commemorating the 5th anniversary of 1 October. On the show tonight, we have Clark County Commissioner Justin Jones, my commissioner. We have Stephen Abrams. He is with Team Enough, the National Chapter Coordinator and fellow Executive Council Organizer. And then returning guest, Gina Moreno. She is with Moms Demand Action, amazing volunteer in one of our videos that we've been putting out there. So thank you, Gina. She's also a survivor, so she's going to talk to us about that tonight. So, Commissioner, I want to come to you first. Thank you so much for coming back on the show, and thank you for your hard work around gun violence prevention. We know you've been working on this for years with us. Tell the audience how you're feeling today with the 1 October anniversary approaching on Saturday and the work that y'all are doing over at the county to address gun violence prevention and 1 October.
Well, I will say thanks, Annette, for the opportunity to be here, and thanks to all the other guests on the show today. It's somber. Every year we have a sunrise ceremony at the county to remember the 58 lives that were lost that day and those that have passed away since then who were victims of that tragedy. It's a tough one. I know the families all come together for the anniversary, and it'll be good to give them an opportunity on Saturday to reflect and to think about what needs to be done going forward to keep our community safe.
Absolutely. And, you know, I want to talk to you about the work you've done on gun violence prevention. We've worked together on this issue for years. In my opinion, it's one of the most critical issues that we have to work on at this point because, you know, you have kids, there's mass shootings all the time, but it's not even that, just violence in our communities, you know, domestic violence, things like that. So talk to us about the work you've done over the years and how you have tried to address gun violence in our communities. And I know you're like me, you're a gun owner and you're not anti-gun at all, but making sure that we have better gun laws to make people safer in our communities.
Sure. So in 2012, as you know, I was fortunate to get elected to the Nevada State Senate. And to be quite frank, it wasn't gun violence prevention wasn't an issue that I ran on. It's not something that I had at the time intended to really take up. But a few weeks after the election was the Sandy Hook tragedy. And I think, like most of America, certainly those of us with kids in school. I mean, I had a child that was in elementary school, just like those parents who lost their child's lives that day. It really made all of us reflect. And the voters in the district had entrusted me to do the right thing, and I decided that it was something that I wanted to take up, and had a lot of conversations with my colleagues in the Senate and with colleagues in the Assembly to not only take on gun violence prevention by adding background checks for all gun purchases, but also addressing the mental health aspects of making sure we have additional resources for those who suffer from mental wellness issues. Because it is a multifaceted issue. So, it was a challenge in the 2013 legislative session to move the bill forward. It was really the first time anything like that had been taken up. It was in large part a result of the failure of Congress at the time to take up meaningful legislation and pass meaningful legislation on this issue, and that it was clear at the time that it was really the states that were going to have to step up. And we were able to, after a lot of help from outside groups like Everytown and Giffords stepping in and really providing resources to us, and having the family members of victims of these tragedies come out and talk about their experiences and their lost loved ones, that we were able to get the bill passed through the Senate and the Assembly. And it was a great day. It was the very end of the session. It was a challenging one, and it was one where not all my colleagues in Democratic Party voted in support of it, and so we were able to send that over to the governor's desk. And although I had some hope that he would sign what I thought was a comprehensive and thoughtful proposal, unfortunately he vetoed the bill. This is Governor Sandoval at the time, vetoed the bill. And that really led down the pathway to what was the next phase, which was a ballot initiative in 2016. And I was fortunate to sit on the committee that took a look at that issue, work a lot with a lot of the team and the volunteers who got all those hundreds of thousands of signatures in order to get it on the ballot. And then the advocacy work going into 2016 in order to get it passed by the voters. So it's been a privilege to work on those issues on the county commission. I think we'll get into it a little bit more. I haven't been able to really work on it too much as a result of what they did in 2015 session, after I unfortunately lost my seat in the Nevada State Senate to prevent local governments from doing anything good on gun violence prevention.
Yeah, and Commissioner, it was funny. I was actually sitting next to you the day that the background check bill passed. I had been visiting
Gallery.
Yeah, for one of the many lobby visits, and I got to be there for that. That was a really important day. I wanted to ask you, in the wake of 1 October, I think, obviously for all the right reasons, there's so much attention paid to the survivors who went through something horrific and tragic. But I don't think we talk enough about law enforcement officers who were also there that day, who saw horrific things happen in front of their eyes, who are also survivors, but also just how gun violence impacts our law enforcement agencies every single day. So I think that's often lost in this conversation, especially when we're talking about rolling back laws like ghost guns and things like that we've put in place to protect everyone. Talk to us about why that's so important to protect law enforcement as well.
Well, I can't tell the story in the same way as he can, but former Sheriff Bill Young, who was a supporter of the background check initiative, tells a story of how both of his two children are both in law enforcement, and his daughter was at the concert as just someone who was watching the concert, and his son who heard about this rushed to the scene in order to save lives and to, quite frankly, find his sister. And that's what a lot of law enforcement officers, a lot of firefighters, a lot of paramedics did on that day. They rushed to the scene to provide that assistance, whether they were on duty or not. And so you really saw our first responders step up to the plate and make sure that the victims of that tragedy got the attention they needed, and took out the perpetrator of that horrible crime. But these types of laws make people in law enforcement safer, right? I mean, if you have to go through a background check and you're unable to obtain a weapon, then you can't use that weapon in committing a crime. And certainly the statistics show that in states that have adopted more serious laws when it comes to gun violence prevention, law enforcement itself is safer. And so when we enact these types of measures, we are protecting not only the public, not only concert goers, not only movie goers, not only students, but the law enforcement officers who are out there every day putting their lives in jeopardy.
Absolutely. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that, because I am very concerned as a Nevadan who was born and raised here, as somebody who lives in your district, and as just somebody who has worked on this issue for a very long time, about some of the rhetoric that we're seeing come from the candidates who are on our ballots this year. Is it concerning to you that we have candidates like Sheriff Joe Lombardo, whose officers are putting their lives on the line every single day, essentially pledging then to overturn gun laws that help keep our community safer? Things like the ghost guns bill that we just passed last legislative session.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a decade in the making to pass laws that are supported by 70, 80+% of the population, like background checks, like preventing ghost guns, like red flag laws. Those all make our society safer. And to have candidates like Joe Lombardo and many others on the Republican ticket who are threatening to repeal everything that we have done for the past decade in this regard is really scary. We can't afford to go backwards after we've made so much progress over the last several years, and we know exactly what that looks like. You saw it happen with efforts that we made in 2013 and then in 2015 when Republicans took over both chambers of the legislature. First priority for them was repealing even the laws that were in place at the time, and a good example of that was the blue card registration requirement here in Clark County for handguns, which Joe Lombardo and others advocated to repeal. And so now it's harder to trace a gun here in Clark County.
So, as you know, this isn't limited just to Lombardo. It's prevalent across, frankly, the Republican ticket. I mean, we see Michelle Fiore out there blathering about this. We see a bunch of them out there blathering about this nonsense. As you know, Adam Laxalt, perennial candidate, has been endorsed by the NRA. They actually have, we found out, we tracked it today. NRA still has ads up for Adam Laxalt and Joe Lombardo as of this morning, promoting it over the 1 October anniversary. So Adam Laxalt's been endorsed by the NRA, so is Joe Lombardo. And when there's a mass shooting, his response, Adam Laxalt's response, typically shifts blame to school security and mental health. Do you think his rhetoric around gun violence or does it bother you as an elected official? Is it problematic?
Yeah, absolutely. It bothers me. I'm a data nerd. And the reason why I pushed forward with background checks and certainly supported other measures that Assemblywoman Sandra Jauregui and others pushed forward is because the statistics prove that these measures make our society safer. And so when you have politicians like Adam Laxalt and Joe Lombardo and others who threaten to repeal the positive steps that we made, the natural result is going to be make our society less safe here in Southern Nevada.
So I want to talk to you. You mentioned this at the beginning of the show, and it's something that I'm very passionate about as well. In 2015, right after Republicans took control, Michael Roberson and others who were in the state Senate pushed through a plethora of laws that changed the way gun violence prevention laws were made in Nevada, were enacted in Nevada. They also pushed through the first stand your ground law since Trayvon Martin's death. They did all kinds of heinous things during the 2015 election or legislative session. So I'm all for allowing cities and counties to enact their own gun laws, but currently in the Nevada legislature is the only entity that can do that here because of the bill known as preemption, or the law known as preemption. Can you talk to our audience through the difference it would make if Clark County would have been able to respond immediately following 1 October?
Sure. I can tell you after 1 October, I wasn't in the commission yet, but certainly since then, there has been a push in order to make it so that on the Strip during big events like New Year's Eve, that we have a complete ban on weapons, because again, it makes it unsafe for tourists, for locals who are visiting those areas. And so that's just one example of where if the legislature re-enabled local governments to take measures like that we as our own community could make the decision as to what is right for our community to make it safer. So, I was definitely a big advocate for it. I testified in support of the bill, and it was disappointing to see it fail at the end of the legislative session last time around. And I am optimistic that working with our legislature and leaders there, that we can make it happen in the next legislative session.
I sure hope so. It's one of my things that I would love to see before I end my career in politics. I think that's one of the bills I'd love to see most get through the legislature. So, Commissioner, as we wrap up with you, and again, for our audience at home, if you have questions for the Commissioner, he actually has to hop to another event tonight with our friends over at NCL. So we'll get to our other speakers in a minute, but we wanted to wrap up with Commissioner Jones first. What would you like to see concerning gun violence prevention legislation moving forward? And what are kind of the goals going forward to address things like 1 October and make our community safer for everyone?
Well, I think repealing preemption is definitely at the top of those priority lists there. I think that the measures that were passed at the national level this year were historic and important, an important step forward. But there's obviously a long ways to go on the national level in order to make us safer. We still have guns that flow across state borders. It's wonderful what we've done here in the state of Nevada, but we know that many of the states around us to the east, north, and south don't have strong gun laws, and that even with tougher gun laws here in the state of Nevada, that those states will continue to be manufacturers and importers of or exporters of firearms. So I think having a communication across the country about what the dangers are and how we can be a safer a country like so many other countries are is really important.
Absolutely. Just one question, Commissioner, before you go from our audience. This question is for Supreme Court's nerd, Will, on our team. He asks, how does the recent Supreme Court's decision overturning one of New York City's gun violence prevention laws affect our ability to address gun violence here in Nevada? Not sure if you have any thoughts on that.
That's a great question. I haven't gotten into it, but certainly it creates a scenario in which anyone here in the state of Nevada or other places that thought that a law was too restrictive could file an action in federal court and take it up the court system in order to challenge those laws and overturn them. So again, it's critical that we elect the right people to Congress, to the Senate, so that we can continue to confirm people to the U.S. Supreme Court, like Ketanji Brown Jackson, who I think she had her investiture today, so that we make sure that we have people going forward that will protect our rights to be a safe community.
Absolutely. Well, Commissioner Stephen Horner says hello in the chat, so just wanted to put that out there. And I want to thank you for all of your advocacy on this issue over the years, and thanks for all you do for our commission district and for everyone in Clark County. We appreciate you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Talk soon.
Great show.
All right. I want to bring in Gina. Gina, thank you so much for joining us. It's always great to talk to you. I wish it was a better occasion to be talking to you on. Thank you for all of your advocacy when it comes to gun violence prevention. If you're comfortable, I know it's a hard week for you, and I want to acknowledge that. Can you just start with how you're feeling as the anniversary comes up and what this time of year is always like for you, being a survivor of 1 October?
Thank you, Annette, and thank you for having me. So I will say, as I always say, these experiences are different for every survivor. So every survivor has their own journey and their own feelings that come up, unfortunately, with these tragic events. I know for me, it usually looks something like, I'm fine, until you're not. And sometimes it's just realizing that this date is impactful and that it's okay to have that impact on you. Because I think the most important thing that we can do as survivors is just kind of honor ourselves. And I do appreciate the experience when the anniversary comes up that I can share my story, like being asked on here today. And I can continue the advocacy that has helped me in my own healing journey. So I'm feeling okay. I'm feeling thankful that we continue to honor this as a community. And I feel sad, of course. But I try to be hopeful as well of the more change to come, especially with the recent changes we're having.
Before we get into some of the other, more kind of political topics, because, in an election year, it's hard not to tie politics into this anniversary since it's so close to an election. Talk to me about how you think our community has changed after 1 October for the better. I mean, I do think just having been born and raised here and seeing what Vegas was like maybe before 1 October, I don't know about you, but I feel it's closer knit, it's tighter than it was before that tragedy. So how do you feel about that? And how do you think we've changed as a community?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do think that, of course, it brought us closer together. We never wish for things like that to happen. But I do appreciate really that everybody in one way or another was affected. So that me talking about it or me bringing it up is not that shocking to anybody because a lot of people knew someone there, could have been there, injured that was there, unfortunately was killed there, had someone that was working at UMC or as law enforcement there. So I really do think it is a sense of belonging in a sense that everyone in this county will always know what you're talking about. You will never feel like no one understands what it was like that day, that night, and the weeks and years now following, unfortunately. So I do understand that sense that when I can share that story, especially to people that are around me in my healing journey, they get it. And it's really nice to be around people that understand that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And even though I wasn't even in town that night, I think it just had such a massive impact on all of us. I can't imagine even being there, but I think it did change so many of us forever. So I want to pivot a little to the November election. I talked about it at the beginning. You've been doing some advocacy with us recently, and we appreciate you for that. Obviously, as the 2022 election approaches, what are your concerns heading into November? Same kind of question as what we asked the Commissioner Jones. Like, what are you seeing from candidates and what is concerning to you when you hear this rhetoric from these candidates?
Yes, absolutely. My main source of healing as a survivor has been advocating for these changes because it's really hard for me to continue to hear people that are impacted by a similar experience and then to see nothing done about them. So for me, it's very personal. I've always kind of gone by that since Route 91 of saying it's not political anymore, it's personal. And for me, that means our candidates being gun sense champions and being people that do advocate for these gun laws, whether they're campaigning or not. Governor Steve Sisolak in 2019 signed AB 291, which included extreme risk laws and prohibited the sale and use of bump stocks that was used in Route 91. That was personal to me. Our legislature created that. Our governor signed it. So to me, it's very concerning to hear that there could be somebody that could either repeal those or not continue to implement extreme risk laws as they're intended to in our state.
Absolutely. And I'm going to ask one more question. I'm going to hop over to Stefan. So, Joe Lombardo, Sheriff Joe Lombardo, who was sheriff during 1 October, said recently during a Nevada Firearms PAC meeting that he learned nothing from 1 October pertaining to guns. And then he proceeded to use mental health as a scapegoat. As a survivor and also a social worker, what are your thoughts on Sheriff Joe Lombardo's comments, and how does that make you feel as a 1 October survivor?
Personally, it's pretty disappointing. I think a lot of times through Route 91, we have tried to find a reason. And I know that as sheriff at that time, there was a lot put on finding a reason behind these things. But I think it would be really unfair to not put some blame onto the magnitude and the use of so many weapons that could create that much chaos in 10 minutes. I think that's really unfair, and it's really disappointing to hear that. Personally, I believe that there was a lot that law enforcement did that day to help us as survivors. And I do think that there should be a connection between mental health and gun violence, because there is intersectionality between the two. As a social worker, I am working with youth that often make violent threats like that. I am going to address the mental health concern of that individual. And I'm also going to ask myself if they have access to guns. So there is an intersection between the two. And I think it's truly unfair and disappointing if we didn't honor that every time we spoke about a mass shooting.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Do you think, because I just find the response from Sheriff Lombardo just horrible. It's actually a horrible response because that is a change of tune when he stood up there and talked the night of 1 October when it happened. So do you think that Sheriff Lombardo's shift to the right on the issue of gun violence prevention, ghost guns, which we're going to talk to Stefan about in a minute, these policies that you and I have worked so hard to enact at the Nevada legislature, do you think he is going right because of his candidacy and taking truly extreme positions on the issue of gun violence prevention because he's running for governor?
Yes, I don't know. This might be a weird thing to say, but I guess I hope so. I guess I would hope that he was honestly saying that as a plan to unfortunately scare extremists that often think that gun violence prevention and gun sense legislation equals anti-gun. Because I truly don't know how you could fathom the idea that such an event with the word carnage, that word has been used, and oh my gosh, that word really strikes me to my core because I was there and I saw it. So I truly would hope that, I guess, someone would have to be doing that for candidacy. Someone would have to be trying to appeal to extremists that believe that gun sense legislation takes away guns, because I don't think that there could ever be a time that you could not acknowledge the fear and the I guess just the insane amount of weapons that man was able to have that night, and the amount of destruction that he was able to do to thousands of our lives that night. That's just not possible without acknowledging guns. So I do think it's appealing to that. And I think that's an unfortunate thing to use as well. I personally would vote for any candidate if they prioritize gun violence prevention. It is a nonpartisan issue, as it should be. And unfortunately, he's using it as partisan.
I couldn't agree more. I think it is a nonpartisan issue. I own a gun. My husband has had a gun for a long time. He comes from Montana. And so you're not anti-gun if you're pro-gun violence prevention policy. And I think that's such a notion. It's just such a lie that they tell out there, and it's ridiculous. So, Gina, we're going to come back to you in a minute. Thank you for that. I want to bring in Stefan Abrams. He's with Team Enough, a national chapter coordinator, fellow and executive council organizer. Thank you for joining us again. We appreciate you. You were an instrumental part of Brady campaign's efforts to address ghost guns. They helped us here in Nevada with the legislation last session. We were so proud to work with you on that. That's part of the legislation that we're talking with Gina about right now, that Sheriff Joe Lombardo has said he would overturn. Tell the audience about what you do with Brady Teams Enough and why ghost guns are such an important part of the equation to solving gun violence prevention.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. And, I started my journey right after the Parkland shooting as at the time, that was the end of my freshman year of high school. And, ever since then, now I'm a sophomore in college, and, I've been working with Team Enough and, advocating throughout the state of California. And, I'm very lucky for these past, year and a half to be able to do that nationally and work with, people across the country. But something that, I saw over my time working with Brady was the rise in ghost gun recoveries, especially, in California, where we started tracking, they were collecting so many ghost guns, they started tracking, and it was growing exponentially. And so, when I was 17 years old, one of my mentors, Steve Lindley, who we'll be hearing from later, he really showed me, how bad the issue of ghost guns was. And, he was going to gun shows and showing people how easy it is to purchase all these parts. And, we collaborated, and I said, what if we showed how easy it would be for a minor, me, being a 17-year-old at the time in the state of California, which is known to have, some of the strictest gun laws in the country. What if I was able to, go make a purchase? So we made a video about it. I did it online. And it was shipped directly to my house. I did not assemble it, but, I showed how easy it was. And, that video that we made was, played during Steve's testimony during the AB 286, the ghost gun law, hearing. And I think, it's just been very powerful to see, the issue of ghost guns, really becoming a national, talking point. It's a part of our vocabulary now when talking about the issue of gun violence, because it should be, because we've been fighting for decades for background checks and all these laws that do save lives. In Nevada, as the commissioner was talking about earlier, we have done a lot of work in the past decade, especially on this. So ghost guns, if we don't do anything to take action on ghost guns, all of those laws that we fought for, don't matter, because you don't have to go through a background check. There's no process of being able to purchase it. They don't even know still how many ghost guns there are in circulation. So I think that encompasses why the issue of ghost guns is really important.
So I want to lean in a little more on ghost guns, because it was such an important part of the response that we worked on with Assemblywoman Sandra Howdegee, with people like Gina and you last session, and we've done other gun laws as well together. We talked about this. Sheriff Joe Lombardo oversaw the response to 1 October, but now has pledged to reverse existing laws like the ghost gun law that was passed in 2021. What are your thoughts on how reversing laws like this will impact Nevada? And specifically, talk to us about how the ghost guns are coming actually from Nevada, from certain companies in Nevada, and then being exported to other communities as well. So it's not just impacting Nevadans, it's impacting people outside of our communities as well. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's, especially being in San Diego, being really close to the Mexican border, something that we saw was that, the cartels, wanted ghost guns because they were cheaper, at the time, that those were the guns that were being trafficked. There's a lot of data that shows the amount of gun trafficking that happens from, the Midwest into Nevada and into California. So it is really important that not only does California have strong gun laws, but all of our neighboring states as well. So, Nevada plays a big role in that. And the more, that we all have similar, laws, the more we're able to, help make all of our communities safer. And, to the point you were making about, I believe it was Polymer 80 that's based in Nevada. That is the exact company that, those parts were the ones that were shipped to me. And, the thing with them is like there's those parts are really easy to buy, not just from, those companies, but if, they were in very high demand. So if all the Polymer 80 parts were sold out, or I was only able to buy some of those, I was able to buy them from other, manufacturers because of how popular they became. And I think that is, something we're still feeling the effects of still, even though we've been able to pass these laws. So it's really important that, in order for us to really, make an impact on those problems, those laws, the ghost gun laws, need to be on the books for a while for us to really see us being able to crack down on that problem. So that's what I would say.
I was talking with Gina a minute ago about this trend of certain candidates kind of tracking to the right when they want to get elected and pandering to, as Gina called it, kind of this extremist faction, because we know many gun owners support good, proactive gun violence prevention laws. And studies have shown that the overwhelming majority of gun owners support these laws and putting better laws in place. So do you think there's a trend going on nationally with these candidates to pander to that more extremist base on gun violence prevention issues and frankly other issues to try and, drum up that extremism and essentially strike fear in people that somehow gun laws are going to take away their guns, which is not true?
Sure. I think first off, it's not I'm kind of surprised because it's not a winning issue. I have the statistic right here. Among gun owners, 77% support, requiring background checks. And, talking to some of my coworkers today and my colleagues, someone said, the only place that background checks are unpopular is the U.S. Senate. So, and I think, that really speaks volumes to, the type of narrative that our politicians are portraying, because, for me, especially, running a youth program, a lot of my students, can't vote. They're not old enough to vote. And, so we are not Republican, we're not Democrat, we are strictly driven by, many of them just because they don't want to be afraid to go to school. They don't want to, their younger siblings to have to worry about, going through mass shooter drills and, us, continuing to, traumatize the next generations with, mass shooter drills, because, this is an issue that, people should, that obviously Americans, all are for, common gun laws. It's, it's time our politicians, see, we see that same percentage of, willingness to want to, make our community safer at that level.
Do you feel like and I have my own opinions on this, but do you feel like there will ever be a time, maybe in the future when young people take over, hopefully, that gun violence prevention work will be less divided? Because as Gina said, this should be an absolutely nonpartisan issue. Saving people's lives and caring about people's well-being and having the right to live as a child who's just going to school, I feel like that's a basic fundamental human right. So do you feel like there'll ever be a time where these issues are nonpartisan and are less divided?
I want to say yes, because I think my generation is really the one who has fully seen the effects of having to go through mass shooter drills since, I was in elementary school, still to today, where, we still are seeing a lot of threats, and, people are being pulled out of class. I think it's time that, we frame this issue as a public health crisis. There are so many factors, there's not a, for lack of a better term, like a silver bullet that, can solve the issue of gun violence. There's a lot of contributing factors. And I think my generation specifically is way more interested in actually being able to, find various solutions to reducing gun violence. The gun violence epidemic in America is so bad. I can only wish, to see that, drastically fall. The numbers of the gun deaths every single year drastically fall in my lifetime. But I do think, my generation will be the generation that has a chance to end gun violence because, it has been such an active, part in our lives. And I think just I think also a big point to bring up is that gun violence prevention groups have never been this strong. You used to be, you can never go up against the NRA, but I think, we've change that opinion. And we are, if forced to be reckoned with now, because we have thousands of volunteers, across the country that are ready to, do the work, especially. And I think it's really important for us to continue to organize around this issue and keep the momentum up.
I couldn't agree more. On the topic of the NRA, and Gina, I'm going to come back to you. In addition to Sheriff Joe Lombardo, who is kind of tacked to the right on this, we also have perennial candidate Adam Laxalt running for the United States Senate here in Nevada. And he and the sheriff have been endorsed by the NRA, of course. So in response to the Uvalde massacre, Adam Laxalt blamed mental health and school security and literally everything under the sun other than guns. Do you think that response and those responses, the thoughts and prayers responses that we see after every mass shooting, is shifting blame and accountability away from the gun lobby? And do you think that's intentional?
Yes, I absolutely do. I believe that it's usually, like we talked about before, something that we say to evoke fear out of people, to say that it could be something that's bigger than us. A lot of people talk about the fact that guns are a weapon and that people have to use that weapon, but there is unfettered access to these weapons. There is evidence that these gun laws do work. There's evidence that extreme risk laws, protection orders work. There's evidence that even the legal age, the shooter in the Uvalde shooting waited until he was 21 years old to purchase that weapon. So I think it's really important to understand. Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me, 18 years old. He waited until he was 18 years old to do that. So had there been some type of age requirement, we maybe could have seen a difference. Again, in every shooting, I always want to honor and respect that survivors have a different feeling, of course, of how it happened, why it happened, what could have been done. And I would never want to take the stories away from those parents and those children and the teachers that had to endure it that day. But I think to, again, not recognize the role that these guns play in these mass shootings would be truly unfair. And so to have a candidate that does not recognize it, that does not advocate for safer gun laws and gun sense prevention through whatever avenue they would like, that would decrease gun violence prevention, would be a candidate that would not have my vote, and that would not create a safer place for all of us.
Stefan, same question for you. Do you think it's an out when these politicians or people who want to be politicians use those reasons as their excuses, or give thoughts and prayers with zero action after it?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that, if we want to do something about mental health, or making our schools safer, we're all for it, and I think it is really just very hypocritical for them to pretend that they're offering up solutions when, we have done a lot, progressive groups, specifically to, fund social workers, to, make sure we have more, school counselors, to make sure, that our kids are safer in school. And it does not, statistically, guns in schools do not make us safer. That is fact. So I think, it is time that, we invest in our communities and we invest in the people who are going to make sure that, we can, as a society, make sure that we have the tools to prevent gun violence, that are backed up by actual facts. And I think that is important.
Absolutely. Gina, before we go to audience questions, and just a reminder for folks out there, we are going to come to audience questions. We also are going to wrap today with Stephen Lindley, who we were just talking about a few minutes ago, former law enforcement agent who is working on gun violence prevention from the law enforcement angle, which I think is so important to bring into this conversation, especially during 1 October. Gina, we talked about it at the beginning. It's a tough time for you. It's a tough time for so many survivors all across the country when these anniversaries come up. And unfortunately, now there's just more and more of these anniversaries. But specifically, when the Route 91 anniversary comes up, how have you been doing to make sure that you're taking care of yourself? And what suggestions do you have for other people who have been survivors or victims of gun violence? How should they take care of themselves too as a mental health professional?
Yeah, I do think first or foremost, it's important to recognize how you're feeling and identify things that work for you. So there is no one cookie cutter way to feel. I think it's very important to identify the supportive people around you. I surround myself with my family during this time, whether it's going outside, taking a walk. I practice yoga for my own mental health. And also it's very important to recognize that there might need a need for professional mental health counseling. And that is, I don't even like saying the word need because I think everyone could benefit from therapy. So recognizing if you are being triggered at that point, reaching out to whatever you can do. There is in Nevada the 988 number that is will be able to connect you. It's for suicide risk. And then, of course, always contacting either 311 for mental health resources or even just Googling places around you. I do think it's important to find your people. For me, this has been healing because I know that I can create change. I always say that every organization, whoever is doing it and getting it done is the way to go. So try to find one of these organizations that is advocating for change. I truly can't tell you how healing it has been for me. And I think it almost sometimes is just different to people when they see how far I've come, how easily I can talk about it. And that's through the support and the control I have because I know I'm advocating for the change and being around people like Stefan and you, Annette, and everybody in this fight to continue to advocate change, no matter who you're with. So that's what I would say to people. Reach out for the help, identify what you are feeling, and surround yourself with people that understand.
Yeah. And thank you so much, Gina, for your advocacy and for all of your work. And we have so many Route 91 survivors in our Battleborn Progress Institute for Progressive Nevada network, Story Bank. So thank you to all of them. Assemblywoman Sandra Howdegee, Heather in the North. She's amazing. There's so many incredible human beings who went through something so horrific who have turned that into action. So thank you for all you do. I want to move to some audience questions, and then we're going to turn to Mr. Lindley with to talk a little bit about law enforcement. Gina, the first question is for you, and I think it's really important to pivot to this next is how can people in our community or all across the country support gun violence survivors, especially when we approach dates like 1 October?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's super important if there are survivors in your life if you don't know how they heal or how they like to be supported, to ask. I would think that anybody that is seeking support or wants anything is okay with having that question asked to them. I do think it's very important to amplify stories if there are survivors sharing the stories, so people do understand the reality of that horrific night. I know that sometimes I use that as a reminder to tell people that I'm okay, but this terrible thing happened. And I just want to share because that is how I'm healing from it. So amplify stories. There are support groups. There's, of course, groups in the Valley through the Vegas Strong Resiliency Center. If you do want a support group that's focused around gun violence prevention, there are survivor support groups through every town that they can find by typing the word survivor to 64433. And if they're not a survivor and just want to join the advocacy, they can type the word join to 64433. And of course, there's all these amazing groups that they can join. Brady, March for Our Lives, all these other advocacy groups. So I would just say to honor survivor stories, reach out and support them and the reality of these unfortunate experiences, and advocate for change, because that's truly what has helped me the most.
Gina, another question for you, and I think we'll just kind of close it out for you on this. There's a lot of folks who are still going through their healing journey, whether that's because of gun violence, maybe their families survived. So many people were impacted, like you said, by this tragedy. What advice do you have from them as they move along this healing journey?
It's very important to recognize that the healing journey is non-linear. I say that because I was studying trauma as a Master of Social Work student when Route 91 happened to me. And I could talk about trauma and the trauma of our youth in our community. And I don't think I truly ever understood until this incident happened to me. So I think it's very important to recognize that there are going to be days that are worse than others. And I don't want anyone to look at me and think, wow, like I should really be sharing and advocating more, because there are days that I am not like this. There are days that I am fearful. There are football games that I try to attend that have big, loud, what are they called? Cannons, where I go into a fetal position and hear that sound and immediately I'm back to somewhere 5 years ago. So it's very important to recognize where you are and get the help that you need if you do feel like professional help would be available to you. Also, telling people in your life so that they understand your triggers, your anxiety, and recognizing that healing is not linear. It may take a very long time and there are ups and downs, and just to be very, very patient with yourself.
100%. Gina, how do folks get involved with the good work that you're doing at Everytown, or just get involved with you generally?
So anyone that wants to find me on Twitter, if I can connect anyone personally to that, my personal Twitter is Gina Speaks, just my first name, Geena Speaks. If you want to get involved with our local Moms Demand chapter in Nevada, you would text JOIN to 64433. And again, if you are a survivor, you could text survivor to 64433. If you have been impacted by gun violence or know somebody and don't identify as a survivor, you can always just connect to myself through our local chapter. I'm here for support. I'm here for coffee. I'm here for whatever you may need. This has become a big passion of mine. So just reach out to me and I will connect you in whichever way you'd like to get involved.
I appreciate that. Stefan, same question for you. How can people get involved in the fight to end gun violence? And how do folks get involved with Brady and the good work y'all are doing there?
Yeah, no, you can definitely, go to www.teamenough.org if you are between the ages of 14 and 26 and get involved with, young people across the country who are doing great work. You can also join a Brady chapter near you as well. But my biggest, just piece of advice is just, get involved, because I think anyone, who comes into this work as a survivor or not, I think it really takes, it's really daunting to think that you could actually be a part of, making an impact in your community, but it really just takes, the first step of, getting involved, going to that meeting, getting coffee with Gina, it just really takes that one step because, these are issues that are personal, that should be personal to everyone, because it is our community, it is our future. So, get involved, now, because there's no better time to get involved than today. So.
Absolutely. I want to thank you both for joining us. We are going to move now to Stephen Lindley, Stefan's mentor, as he said earlier. Stephen really helped us during the Ghost Guns bill. And was pivotal. He provided testimony during that bill to help us get Ghost Guns passed. And he did a lot of work with Stefan and other people to highlight the risks that ghost guns pose to our communities all across the state of Nevada and the surrounding states, but also the risks that ghost guns pose to our law enforcement agencies and our police officers. So we wanted to bring him on to talk about that. He wasn't available tonight, but he did film a segment with Amber, our gun violence prevention manager, our Northern Nevada manager. And so we want to bring them in now to share that. And I'll be back with you in just a few minutes to talk to you about that. I want to thank these two guests for joining us tonight, but now we're going to bring in Stephen to talk more about ghost guns. Thanks all, and we'll be back in just a few minutes.
Hello, thank you so much. My name is Amber Falgo. I am the Northern Nevada manager with Battleborn Progress. I am so excited to be here with Steve Lindley from Brady United Against Gun Violence. He is a former law enforcement agent and he has been fascinating to talk to. I'm going to have him do a quick intro and tell you who he is and what he does. And then we will get into some questions about his background and how that interplays with gun violence prevention legislation or gun safety legislation. Steve, please tell our viewers who you are and who you're with.
Good morning, Amber. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Steve Lindley. I'm a 28-year law enforcement veteran here in California. I spent some time with the National City Police Department in San Diego County, and then spent 18 years with the California Department of Justice, leaving as the chief of the California Department of Justice Bureau of Firearms. I now work for Brady United Against Gun Violence. I'm also a part-time high school teacher.
Wow, thank you so much. That is absolutely amazing. Your background is incredible, and we're really excited to have you here. So for the first question, I would like to ask you, what is the threat to communities from law enforcement not being involved in the fight to end gun violence?
Well, I think the biggest issue there is it needs to be a partnership between the communities and law enforcement when it comes to reducing violence, especially and specifically violence dealing with firearms. So they need to be on the same page. The community needs to provide law enforcement the tools in order to get that job done. And the law enforcement needs to use those tools effectively and efficiently in order to reduce violence. So there is a partnership there, and that needs to be a very tight partnership and progressive partnership.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think our viewers and our panel will find that fascinating. So also, what roles do law enforcement play in preventing gun violence? Now, that could be, in practice when they're operating in the field, or even as they retire and move into maybe some advocacy work that works to stop gun violence.
Law enforcement has a key role there. One, they are literally on the front lines of this fight. They deal with this violence, unfortunately, on a day-to-day basis. And oftentimes they do see what works and what doesn't work. But a lot of the laws that have been put into place in various cities or counties with ordinances or in states come from law enforcement having a lack of tools, like gun violence restraining orders. It's not necessarily the first thing that they want to run to utilize in these situations, but it is an effective tool that they can use in the proper situations. So, with that, law enforcement needs to have a voice in what is going to be effective in making our communities a safer place.
I couldn't agree more. And it's very refreshing to hear a former law enforcement officer talk about those things. It truly is. Next, how would dismantling Nevada's current gun laws impact local communities? For example, we have an extreme risk protection order law. We have a ghost gun law. We've made a lot of progress on these laws in the last few years. And how would undoing that progress take us backwards?
Well, first, with the gun violence restraining orders, that is a tool that is in the tool chest for law enforcement to use. Oftentimes, it might be the last tool for them to be able to utilize. But this isn't an Second Amendment or a gun grab issue. People have the right to go to court. They have their day in front of the judge in order to represent themselves and identify that maybe they aren't actually right to the community, and that needs to be lifted or not put in place. But when you remove that from law enforcement, it comes to a certain point where law enforcement might hit a wall and they really can't get through it because there's no more tools. This is just one more tool for them to be able to utilize within the court system to protect the communities and keep firearms away from people who might have a mental health issue or just having a bad series of days, which unfortunately we've all had to one or another. When it comes to ghost guns, the ghost gun epidemic has just flooded our country. And unfortunately, a lot of those guns come from a company in Nevada. And, it is affecting not just big cities or big states, but everybody. That is a fight that law enforcement has to deal with. These ghost guns have been trained on law enforcement far too often because it's easy for people who are underage or people who are prohibited from purchasing a firearm through the mail, and they get them with absolutely no background check. So the main focus here is utilizing the tools that we already have in place and treating these ghost guns exactly how they are. They are firearms, and to have a background check in that to make sure that the other laws that a state or a city might have in place prevents people from purchasing those firearms that can't legally purchase one. Right now, again, you can get them through mail order to your house. A little bit of tinkering, and you're good to go with a firearm that did not go through the standard background check process. And with that, these are tailor-made to people that might have a mental health issue, have domestic violence tendencies, or are just prohibited because of their other criminal behavior in the past. They're almost solely made for these group of individuals.
Absolutely. Thank you for talking in detail about that. It's a very scary issue. The ghost gun issue can be very scary. I know even as a parent, the thought of my teenager being able to purchase a firearm online is truly, truly disturbing. And a segue into my next question almost is this, in your view, would increased school security stop incidents like the Uvalde massacre that we saw earlier this year?
That's a very complex question, and it might need to be solved community by community. Overall, there's been several school shootings where there has been, school resource officers on the campus, and it has not prevented a shooting. There are other ways of combating that issue. Looking at safe storage laws, how are these individuals getting those firearms, especially when they're underage? Looking at the purchasing age of these firearms, and then also looking at, do we really need weapons of war in our communities? Although, let's say the standard assault weapon, or the AR-15, is not used very often in normal street crime, it is the firearm of choice when it comes to our mass shootings, specifically school shootings. Do we really need those type of firearms with large capacity magazines in our communities? So there are other ways to look at it. Also, when you put law enforcement into school programs, talking from experience, oftentimes they're misused by administration, that if they can't deal with an unruly student, we're going to call law enforcement and you're going to be arrested. That does not promote a healthy interaction between the community and law enforcement, because law enforcement is looked more as not a problem solver or a community partner, but it's almost like the boogeyman, that you need to be fearful of law enforcement. And that's not what law enforcement needs. It's not what the community needs. And then it can also, law enforcement in that context, communities of color sometimes can be overplaced with law enforcement, especially in the school system, where law enforcement is trying very hard in order to, how should I say it, mend those bonds with the community, because in order to solve these problems, we do need to have a very effective law enforcement and community bond and cooperation in order to solve these issues, not only in the short term, but in the long term. I think sometimes that becomes counterproductive in certain communities, having law enforcement so attached to our school districts.
Definitely. I don't think, as you talked about, the relationship between the community and law enforcement is a crucial piece of solving the issues that we see with that relationship currently, right? And you never, I'm sure you would agree, you do not want law enforcement to ever be an occupying force in a school or really any community. So it's important that there's a balance there.
Absolutely. I mean, all these problems are not going to be solved by one entity or one group. It is going to take a partnership. And where we've seen that there's an effective long-term cooperation, trust, and participation between the community and law enforcement, you start seeing problems go away. So, everyone has a stake in that. We all live in our separate communities. We all want ourselves, our families, our children to be safe. And, but it takes participation in order to do that, and cooperation with law enforcement. Give them the tools that they need. Talk to them about their frustrations, and look at sometimes alternatives than just the criminal justice. And quite frankly, law enforcement is very good at coming up with ideas about not just using arrest as a means to solve the problem, but again, that could be a short-term solution. We're looking for a long-term.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So the final question we have for you, and it's been really wonderful chatting with you. Why do you think, and we talked about this a little bit before we started, why do you think law enforcement agents are hesitant to come forward in supporting gun safety legislation? I know this probably varies, but community by community here in Nevada, we have some issues with law enforcement backing certain policies that have been put forward by our governor and our legislature. So what are your thoughts on why they're hesitant, or in general, why law enforcement agents are hesitant to sort of join this fight?
That is a very complex question. And it is kind of a community by community. There's oftentimes a vast difference between how city police chiefs look at these problems as compared to elected sheriffs. Look at the problem, especially sheriffs from rural communities. So here in California, there's a vast difference between how the California Police Chiefs Association looked at firearm legislation and issues as compared to the California Sheriff's Association. So I don't really know what the answer to that is or why, but law enforcement does have a key component here. It might be they don't want to get involved in making the laws that they're going to have to enforce, which I've heard from some law enforcement, and I get that. Is they really can't have the keys as well to the authority. So they just want to look at, hey, we enforce the laws that are made by the legislators. Okay, there's that for it. But on the flip side, there's a lot of things that law enforcement has to deal with on a daily basis that they have ideas about what works and what doesn't work. And oftentimes you hear on a variety of different issues, they need tools in order to solve those problems in an effective manner. So when it comes to some of these firearm issues, when you look at common sense firearm laws, it does provide law enforcement tools. When it comes to gun violence restraining orders, that is a tool in law enforcement's tool chest. It might be one of the last tools they're going to pull out, but if needed, it's there for them to help that individual, their family, and the community be safer. So law enforcement should have voice in this, and they're dealing with this problem on a day-to-day basis. They are the front line when it comes to dealing with these issues. And the people that we ask deal with this day in and day out.
That is very true. And I tend to agree with you. And I really thank you for your perspective on that. It's not often that we get to hear a law enforcement perspective on this issue. And I think it's very important as we move forward to encourage folks from law enforcement to come forward and to also talk about how there are a vast amount or a great many solutions to this gun violence problem. And it is upon all of us, not just some of us, to start working towards ending this problem. So thank you so much for joining me. Steve, it has been wonderful to have you.
Amber, thank you for the invitation. I look forward to talking with you again.
Amber, for that excellent discussion. It's so important to have law enforcement as a part of this conversation so that we're protecting everyone in our communities from gun violence. And I want to thank all of our fabulous guests tonight, Gina especially, who shared her story with us about the 1 October tragedy and her being a survivor of that mass shooting. As we go into the weekend and we honor the lives that were lost during 1 October, I am reminded that this work never ends and that we have so much more work to do in our communities all across the state and all around the country. This work never ends, and there are so many of these tragedies, unfortunately, and we have a responsibility to make sure that we're keeping everyone safe in our communities and that we're doing better on the issue of gun violence prevention. Like I said at the beginning of the show, just because we support gun violence prevention measures does not make you anti-gun. contrary to popular belief on the right. And you can be a gun owner and support better gun laws. And so many Nevadans do. So as we move forward, I think it's everyone's responsibility on the right, on the left, in the middle, no matter what your party is. As Gina said, this is a nonpartisan issue. And we call on all candidates from all political spectrums to support better gun violence prevention laws and keep our communities safe, because it's disappointing when people like Sheriff Joe Lombardo and others don't support those laws, even though it will keep people in our communities safer. So as we move forward, we want to leave you with two really important pieces of information. One report that our team worked with Center for American Progress on over the summer about the link between extremism and guns here in Nevada and all across the country. This is an updated report from one that we did earlier in 2016, talking about the, the uprising of political discourse and extremism all across this country and how that connects to gun violence. So we're going to put that in the chat for folks at home. We're also going to tweet about it. So please look at that report. Amber on our team spent a tremendous amount of time with our friends over at Center for American Progress producing that report to really talk about the ties between extremism and gun violence. There was also a new report released this week from our friends over at Center for American Progress, talking more about how how gun violence is tied to so many of these issues. So both of these reports are going to be in the chats tonight on all of the different pages that we're streaming to. Take a look at both of those reports, share those reports with your friends, tweet about those reports, because we want to make sure that as many people can see them as possible as we enter into this weekend and into this anniversary. So I want to thank all of you at home for watching this very important episode of Out in Front. Thank you to all of our guests again for sharing their stories and their opinions about gun violence prevention. And if you want to join our team and continue to make progress on all of the issues we work on, including gun violence prevention, join our Storytellers Network, join our online army that Allison is building. We want to have you on our team. So put your information in the chat. We will get in touch with you because there's so much more work to be done to honor the people who we lost during 1 October and to honor the survivors and our communities all across Nevada. So thank you again for joining us. We will be back out in front with Annette and me next week talking about voting rights. So much is coming up. We got our sample ballots in the mail today. So I want to make sure that you all have the latest and greatest information as we enter mail ballots coming home to your homes and also early voting. So join us next week. We'll be live at 5 on Thursday. Thanks so much, everyone, and have a great weekend.